music, science. It's the Amoeba People Podcast. Greetings and welcome to the Amoeba People Podcast, the show where science and music collide. Or nearly did, but they're both safe thanks to the wonders of self-driving technology. My name is Ray Hedgepeth, the singer-guitarist of the unapologetically nerdy science rock band, the Amoeba People. And today's episode, wow, we are going to be talking about volcanoes with an amazing volcanologist named Dr. Arianna Soldati, who was born in Milan, Italy, has lived in France, the UK, the US, and has now settled in Munich, Germany, where she currently does her volcanological work at Ludwig Maximilian University. And yes, I did ask her the big questions, the important ones, like could Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi really have a lightsaber duel on a lava flow like they did in Revenge of the Sith? Spoiler alert, George Lucas apparently did not consult a volcanologist before writing that scene. Anyway, I can't wait to share the interview with you because volcanoes are insane. But you know what else is insane? This guitar riff. That's the riff that erupts at the beginning of our song Volcano, which is on our latest album, The Fossil Record. We're going to break down that song and listen to it in pieces, and then we're going to put it back together, much like scientists do when they're studying volcanoes. They look at the various components and see how those components work as a complete system. But before we get to our song, there's some creepy music playing in the background. It must be time for a scary story. The cool thing about this story is, you guys, it's true. So, one ordinary morning in the year 1738, near the Bay of Naples in Italy, workers were digging to lay a new foundation for a summer palace for the King of Naples. Yeah, rough life, huh? When they hit upon the ruins of an ancient city that had been buried for centuries. And this turned out to be the ancient city of Herculaneum, named in honor of the Greek hero Hercules, a town believed to have been completely buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, an infamous and very active volcano that was responsible for one of the most devastating eruptions in history. People who know their history and who knew their history in the 1700s knew that the eruption in 79 AD not only buried Herculaneum, but also the city of Pompeii, as well as a few others. There was a historical accounting of the eruption by a guy named Pliny the Younger, who had been lucky enough to be vacationing out across the Bay of Naples in Misenum, and therefore was out of the path of immediate danger. But his uncle, Pliny the Elder, who was also in Misenum at the time, he actually died because he went back into Pompeii to help rescue some friends and anyone else who needed help. So people in the 1700s at this dig site would have known about the eruption in 79 AD from Pliny the Younger's account of it. Some sources say that Pompeii was discovered in about 1748, about 10 years after Herculaneum, and other sources say it was discovered in 1755 when workers were digging the Sarno Canal. The point is, Pompeii was found, and excavations continued for another 100 years or so. But it wasn't until a fellow named Giuseppe Fiorelli took over the excavations in 1863 that the most stunning discovery was made. Fiorelli was curious about these numerous empty spaces that had been found in the ash layer that resulted from the eruption. These empty spaces, these voids, contained human remains, skeletons, or what remained of those skeletons. Fiorelli realized that the empty spaces must have been from the human bodies, which then decayed, leaving the bones, yes, but also leaving an empty space in the shape of a human body. He thought if he could pour plaster down into these empty spaces, he could create a cast of the victims of the eruption. Then they could carefully dig around the plaster casts and remove them from the ground. The result was incredible. The plaster casts recreated those final moments for the victims of Vesuvius. Some were crouched down, covering their heads. Others were embracing loved ones, seemingly to protect them from something they would not be able to escape. And even others seemed to be clutching objects, prized possessions. These amazing plaster casts give us a glimpse into one of the most terrifying historical horrors imaginable. And as if that's not creepy enough, a recent study suggests a demise for some of the inhabitants of Herculaneum that cranks the creep meter up to 100. This recent study suggests that some of the victims, like those in Herculaneum who were a bit closer to the volcano, might have actually had their bodily fluids and tissues vaporized. Yeah, but it gets even worse. The study also suggests that the temperatures in the air were so high that not only did bodily fluids and tissues boil away, but the blood in the veins and the arteries of the victims, as it began to boil, expanded. And get this, any blood that would have been inside of the skull in that moment would have caused their heads to explode. Okay, I know it sounds like I'm making this up, but this is based on a recent study. It sounds insane. I mean, as if a terrifying volcanic eruption wasn't enough, the idea that your head might explode is something I never thought I'd have to worry about. So what do you do with information like this? I'll tell you what we do with information like this. We talk to an expert. So to wrap our heads around this, sorry for the bad pun, we're going to listen to my interview with Dr. Arianna Soldati. But before we do that, let's lighten the mood a little bit with a little science rock. Okay, our song Volcano covers two famous eruptions from history, the first being that of Vesuvius from 79 AD, which we've already talked about in this episode, and Krakatoa in 1883. Now, these eruptions happened halfway around the world from each other, so we realized that if we're going to create a song called Volcano, that when we record this, we need to give it a sort of global feel. So we're going to break apart the middle of the song, the instrumental portion where the trumpets come in, but we're going to start with just the drums and the bass guitar, Mr. Dustin Jordan and Ryan Mosley. So as you can tell, there's just two chords there. The whole song is just two chords. We'll increase the tempo here. And why not go a little faster? As you can hear, we're trying to convey the energy of a volcanic eruption and perhaps even the feeling you might have if you were running away from a pyroclastic flow or a lava flow. Now we're going to add in some bongos, which really add so much. You're going to hear the difference that this makes. So this is Dustin Jordan, our drummer slash percussionist, playing the bongos. And of course, we still have Mr. Ryan Mosley on the bass. Okay, now Dustin's going to add in more percussion here, some tambourine, some blast blocks, which is kind of like a plastic cowbell, and the vibra slap, which will be the first thing you hear. And on this next pass through is where you will hear the blast blocks. All right, so now it is time to bring in my part. I've just been sitting back this whole time just watching the magic unfold. Let's bring in some guitar. Okay, now for this last part that we're going to throw in here, these are the trumpets. These were done by a friend of ours named Paul Justice, an amazing trumpet player. And he came in and I had sent him some parts that I had actually, I sang them. I'm not good at writing down music. I can do it, but it takes me forever. So I just hummed it into the recorder and sent that to him, and he learned the parts that way. And he came in, he's going to layer in all these trumpets. So every trumpet you hear is Mr. Paul Justice, ladies and gentlemen. You're going to hear the whole thing, don't worry, but it's going to be at the end of this episode. And before we get to our interview with the amazing Arianna Soldati, who just is so smart and so wonderful and so excited about volcanoes, before we get to that, let's listen to what makes the Amoeba People recording sessions so fun, the background vocal outtakes.
Volcano! 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 Oh, that goes really long. Hey! Volcano! 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 Andale! Andale! Epa! Epa! Uno, dos, tres! Volcano! 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 Woo! Uno!
I love going back and listening to those ridiculous vocal outtakes. Always a ton of fun. Thanks for indulging me. Okay, before we get to our interview with volcanologist Arianna Soldati, a word from our sponsor.
Are you tired of waiting millions of years for new rock to form? Are you searching for a geologic phenomenon that can quickly generate that rock you desire? Is there a mountain in your area whose appearance would be greatly improved by a giant smoldering crater? Do you prefer landscapes that are covered in ash, showered by chunks of broken rock, blasted by hot gases, and bathed in lava? If you answered yes to any of these questions, a volcano may be just what you're looking for. Volcanoes. They're kind of a big deal.
Warning, volcanic eruptions may cause unpleasant side effects, such as loss of life, catastrophic landscape destruction, extremely loud noises, and temporary blotting out of the sun.
Just imagine what it would be like if something that happened to you at the age of 2 was so impactful and influential that the course of your entire life was set in motion by that one influential encounter, even if it was through a television set. That's what happened to our guest, volcanologist Arianna Soldati, who grew up in Milan, Italy. She's also lived in France, the United States, and currently in Munich, Germany. But when she was 2 years old, she witnessed a volcanic eruption that would forever influence the direction of her life.
No, seriously, I have always been, and there's a story in my family, and of course I remember hardly anything about it, right? So apparently there was, I saw this eruption on television. It was the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991. And it was a gigantic eruption. You know, if you think about something like Eyjafjallajökull in Iceland in 2010 that grounded air traffic for a bunch of time, it was the same thing, and it made a big impression on me. And I would not stop talking about it. And I do remember actually my grandma walking me to kindergarten and me talking to her about this because, you know, in my imagination as a child, there was, whoa, like this big eruption in this place I've never even heard of, but sounds fascinating. And then it always stayed with me. Always, always.
Now, you may have heard her mention the infamous Icelandic volcano, Eyjafjallajökull, which I completely said very quickly because I know I butchered it, and my apologies, dear Icelandic people and dear volcano enthusiasts out there who know how to pronounce it correctly. But I wanted to mention that there's a great movie directed by and starring Ben Stiller called The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. Very underrated. I don't think it did very well in the box office, but check it out if you get a chance. There's a scene where he's in Iceland and he's on a downhill skateboard. And if you were raised in the 80s like me, you'll know what a downhill skateboard is. And he's heading down, and as he's going down this crazy road toward these amazing mountains, which it turns out is a volcano, cars are heading in the opposite direction, and he can't figure out why. And of course, it turns out they're saying, cool. So listen closely for that name that I'm butchering right now. Oh man, it sounds so much better when she says it. Anyway.
It's volcanology is the very visual part of geology, right? So, if you ask people who are in the field what got them into it, it's usually dinosaurs or volcanoes or colorful minerals. Those are the visually appealing things. They're the ones that strike your imagination.
So I had this entire list of really scientific questions I was going to ask Arianna, but of course my childhood just kind of burst through in the same way that volcanoes influenced her childhood. And immediately I began to think of all the questions me and my friends used to ask when we were little. Like if you put your hand in a lava flow, like what would happen to your hand? Would it just burn? Would it be gone completely? Like what would actually happen? And then I heard not long ago that you would actually need to be more concerned with catching fire before you could even touch the lava flow. And that made me curious because then I thought of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker in their lightsaber duel in Revenge of the Sith. So here they are on these like pieces of rock floating down this lava flow, and they haven't caught fire. They are perfectly fine, balancing on these, slabs of rock, surfing down a lava flow.
Yeah, so I'm afraid that we're going to have to live surfing down a lava flow to the Star Wars characters. In real life, we would not be able to do it. And I mean, this is much to my disappointment, right? Like, I would love to do that. But I can't, and you can't either. Because lava flows are really, really hot. So again, it depends on the composition, but we're talking 900 to 1200 degrees Celsius, more or less. So that's over 2000 Fahrenheit. So the Hawaiian ones that you see, the lava flows, they're on the high end of the spectrum. So we're talking 1200. That's really hot. So it depends how fast you would fall on it. So I guess if you were to fall on a lava flow really slowly for some reason, then yes, you would definitely catch fire. If you just walk up to it, however, you don't catch fire. I've done it. I haven't caught a fire. That's great. But it is really, really scorching hot, right? It's not pleasant. And you would not be able to put your hand inside, even if you didn't feel any pain for some reason, because lava is super dense. So people always think, say if I fall into a lava lake, then I'm just going to get swallowed by the lava and, burn or melt or something like that. You're not going to get the chance to. If you fall onto the lava lake, you're just going to kind of stay there on the surface and then die from the heat. Because it's really dense. It's like concrete, right? Like it's like, if you think even just falling into a pool of water, if you do it from a great height, you feel an impact. And lava is a lot denser than water. It's like falling on tar, literally. So you would not be able to go in.
Okay, so moving on from my childhood fears of putting my hand in a lava flow and losing it, it was time for me to ask the big questions, the questions I've already raised here in this episode about Vesuvius. And could this new study have some merit to it? Could your blood boil? Could your tissues boil away? Could parts of your body literally be vaporized? And could your skull actually explode during an intense volcanic eruption?
But I have to say, your blood, yes, it's going to boil. I mean, if you think about the temperature, blood is water basically with other stuff in it, and that boils at 100 degrees. And here we're talking something that's an order of magnitude hotter. So yeah, your blood is going to turn to vapor right away, and pressure is going to increase. And I don't think it's unreasonable to think that your skull might explode.
Quite literally the greatest moment in the interview for me. Your skull
might explode.
Very reassuring. Okay, and she also wanted to clarify something with me. This idea that these people in Pompeii, the poses that we found them in, were them taking shelter or hugging loved ones or clutching things. She needed to kind of clarify the facts behind that.
A bit of myth busting here. The reason why they're in those positions, it's actually, again, the heat. It's gonna do that to you when it kills you. Like, all your muscles are going to contract, and so that's why everybody is in that, like, weird kind of like fetal position. But I mean, at that point, people, well, depending if, like, which city, if you were in Pompeii or Herculaneum, but the eruption was very sudden, but most people died later after the first phase. They left, and then they thought it was safe, and they came back to gather their belongings, and then there was another pyroclastic flow, and they died. And so it's reasonable to think that they might have looked for some kind of shelter inside, but then, a pyroclastic flow is not something you can really get shelter from, basically.
Okay, so now we've dispelled some myths about Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting on a lava flow, as well as myths about the victims in Pompeii from the Vesuvius eruption of 79 AD. And now I wanted to know about her own experiences in a volcano. I asked if she'd been inside of an active volcano herself. Of course, she did not disappoint. Yes, she has been in an active volcano. The volcano was Poas, I believe I'm saying that right, or I hope I'm saying it right, Poas, with the accent on the A, in Costa Rica.
So I was doing fieldwork in Costa Rica for my PhD, and we went to Poas volcano. And Poas, it has this crater that is filled by a lake. It's a water lake. It's not lava, but it's very acidic. So to get there, we had to climb all the way up the volcano first, which actually is not a big climb because there's a parking lot almost to the top, right? But then we had to go down inside the crater to get to the lake, and we were doing water sampling to monitor the composition, how it evolves, the activity of the volcano, and all of that. And that was amazing. I mean, the landscape in there it's like being on another planet. You have to imagine that there are all of these fumes coming up, and the colors are amazing. There's the red and the bright yellow, and the water has this turquoise color that's almost unnatural, and that, of course, depends on all the reflections and the temperature and composition. And then you have these fumaroles of sulfur coming up on the side.
So she mentions fumaroles here, which, to my knowledge, are those spots where there are cracks in the ground, and the gases from the volcano that are not going upward they're moving pretty much in any direction they can go, and they'll go through the ground, and they'll find spots, weak spots, cracks in the ground, and gases will come up from these spots. And from what I know, they can be pretty dangerous.
And you see these blue flames because the sulfur is burning as well, and it's amazing. You have to wear a gas mask when you're going across these fumaroles. It still stinks like hell.
Okay, a quick word about the underworld. The Roman god Vulcan, who was associated with the underworld, is where we get the word volcano from. And he was not only associated with these volcanic eruptions, which was supposedly him working at his forge underground, but he was also associated with this awful sulfur smell that people associate not only with volcanoes, but with the underworld.
Yeah, and then at the end of the day, we climbed out, and again, it was amazing, but it was also pretty terrifying because Poas does have phreatic eruptions. So magma comes up, but then it's the water of the lake that gets ejected, and there is nowhere to take cover when you're down at the bottom of the caldera, right? Like, you're just there and you're hoping it doesn't go off while you're there, and statistically, it's not going to happen, but then every once in a while it does happen. And
unfortunately, Arianna is very much aware of a number of volcanologists who were in a similar position that she was in and did not make it out alive. So this is a very dangerous job. So I decided to shift away from the grim and kind of focus on the mechanics of it. And I asked her about lava flows. We hear about pyroclastic flows, and we also hear about regular lava flows. We often hear about this term viscosity. And so I asked her to kind of clarify all of this for us so we can kind of make sense of how volcanic eruptions are different from one another.
Right. So the main thing that controls the way a volcano is going to erupt, it's viscosity. So viscosity is its thickness, its stickiness, right? And this depends, for example, on the composition of the magma and on the temperature that it gets erupted at. But if it's fluidy enough, the gas that's contained inside, like the bubbles, they're going to be able to escape gently. And so the magma will just come out of the crater, become lava. That's just what we call it once it's out on the surface, and then flow gently. But if the magma is very viscous, all those gas bubbles that form are going to get trapped, but they're still going to want to grow and rise faster. And so they're going to drive the magma to fragment, we say, to like break apart into tiny ash particles, and those are going to make a big eruptive column, and you're going to have an explosive eruption.
So the more viscous the magma is before it becomes lava is what it's called once it's out on the surface, but the more viscous it is, the thicker it is, the more explosive the eruption will be. The lower the viscosity, then you have more of your standard lava flow. So with all this talk about how volcanoes work and the mechanics of it, the viscosity of the magma, and explosive eruptions as well as quiet eruptions, it seemed that a lot of this stuff was really kind of dark and destructive. So I asked Arianna, tell us something good about volcanoes. What do they do for us that is actually good? Please let there be something.
Volcanoes do plenty of good, and first of all, volcanoes played a big role in the origin of life. They created our atmosphere, or contributed to creating a significant portion of it, for example, by emitting a lot of greenhouse gases that nowadays we think of as a bad thing, but at the time they helped keep our planet to a decent temperature. And even nowadays, they create a bunch of new land, which is amazing. I mean, there's nothing else on Earth that creates new land. So a fascinating thing about volcanoes is that their role in supporting life is incredibly important. And in fact, it is so important that exobiologists, so basically astronomers who look for life on other planets, do so mainly on geologically active works. Like, this is how important volcanoes are to life. They provide energy, and then they recycle material on Earth, from the depth of the mantle to the surface. And so they keep the Earth system going, basically. And a planet that is no longer geologically active is a dead planet. And so we tend to look at volcanoes as these destructive forces, but they are actually the sign that our planet is still functioning.
Wow. And, speaking of dead planets, it made me wonder about the largest volcano in the solar system, Olympus Mons, which is on the surface of Mars. And I asked her, is there like a race to Olympus Mons among volcanologists? Like, who's going to be the first one, not just to get to Mars, but to get to Olympus Mons? I mean, there's somewhere in the volcanologist community, there's got to be some kind of friendly competition going, right?
Wow, that's a fantastic question. There is not that I know of, but maybe there should be one. Because if you think about it, in the volcanology community, we already have maybe a lower sense of danger than the majority of the population. So the idea of, being on a spaceship for, like a couple of years.
Yeah, as she said, volcanologists have a lower sense of danger, but it seems like they would also need a higher tolerance of boredom in order to get there, although maybe that would be worth the wait.
Volcanologists do study Olympus Mons, like, remotely. It's not as cool as, being able to physically walk on it. But yeah, it's going to be one lucky volcanologist that gets to do that.
So right here on this podcast, we are starting the Olympus Mons Challenge. Who will be the first volcanologist out to Mars to touch the largest volcano in the solar system?
We are on.
Okay, so we officially have our first taker. The Olympus Mons Challenge is officially on. Okay, before we go, I did ask Arianna if she knew any good volcano jokes. And being the diligent scientist that she is, she agreed to tell me a volcano joke under one condition. I first had to agree to state beforehand that parametric insurance, ladies and gentlemen, that is disaster insurance, is no joke, and it is taken very seriously in the volcanological community. And Arianna wanted to also mention she's very much aware that the joke is in poor taste. Now, with that caveat out of the way, here's the joke.
A man phones his insurance company to find out whether he can be helped if the volcano erupts, and they assure him that he would be covered.
Now, that was so worth the lengthy caveat at the beginning, because this stuff can be dark. Volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, natural disasters of all kinds, it can get overwhelming. We have no power over these forces of nature, but we do have the power to be informed and to occasionally crack a joke. It helps keep things in balance. And of course, what better way to keep ourselves in balance than with a little music?
Hi everybody, my name is Arianna Soldati. I am a volcanologist, and I am excited to introduce Volcano by the Amoeba People.
Volcano, volcano, volcano.
In the year 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying the nearby cities of Herculaneum and Pompeii in a layer of hot, scalding ash and rock known as a pyroclastic flow. Nearly 2,000 years after the eruption, the preserved remains of the inhabitants of Pompeii were discovered and excavated, a terrifying reminder of the volcano's awesome strength. Krakatoa, Indonesia, one of the loudest volcanic eruptions ever recorded. With an eruption loud enough to be heard 3,000 miles away, it resulted in a tsunami so large, more than 30,000 people perished as a result. Another sobering reminder of the volcano's awesome strength.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Amoeba People podcast. If you'd like to help support the show, you can find us at patreon.com, where you can contribute on a monthly basis. We'd really appreciate that. You can also help support us by reviewing the show in whatever podcast platform you get your podcast in. Apple Podcasts, give it 5 stars, write a nice review. That'd be awesome, because that actually is how people find out about it. And we want more people to know about this podcast that we're making here. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Dr. Arianna Soldati for being just so awesome and loving Volcanoes so much. I'd like to say a thank you to Paul Justice, whose trumpet you heard on the song Volcano. And check out his YouTube channel. It's called Trumpet Dude, and he plays classic jazz standards on vintage trumpets. It's awesome. All the music you heard today was written and performed by us, the Amoeba People, myself, Ray Hedgepeth, Ryan Mosley, and Dustin Jordan. And you can find all of our music on pretty much any platform. You can contact us on social media, and of course, head on over to YouTube and subscribe to our awesome science music videos. All right, everybody, until next time, onward!